Okay, Iron Cross, man-to-man combat, Eastern Front. I took a still from an older video. That's what I'm showing here. But I was thinking, since I played last, I was thinking about all the different reasons why I like the game, and remembering how many, at least slightly unusual design approaches used here. And then I remembered, while I wanted to talk about those, I remembered that in the combat rules, there is actually a little more than 2 pages of designer notes, small text, small font. So I thought I would read those and comment on them. They're that good anyways, as far as designer notes go. So this is a designer's introduction to combat. So this is the boxed game from Game Forms, the predecessor to Iron Cross. So there were many concepts in the game that were difficult to word as distinct rules. So in this introduction, I will take the reader through the rules, highlighting on the more difficult sections in an attempt to make the game more readily playable and the design clearer. Each section will be covered as they appear in the rules. So this designer's introduction is broken up by major rules section. So we have counters. The important thing to remember here, remember in combat the counters are one-sided. In Iron Cross you have double-sided counters. That's a little different in presentation, at least. So important thing to remember here in the combat rules, one-sided counters. Other than the factors on the counters are the more subtle differences between units. Each squad has a different letter designation. That's true in Iron Cross as well. Combined with a slightly different shade of background color. That's actually really neat. So each squad has a slightly different shade of the same general side color, force side color. Green for the Americans, gray for the Germans in the case of combat. That's pretty cool. That was not used in Iron Cross. Maybe it's because Iron Cross was a magazine game, maybe. Not sure why. Obviously in Iron Cross you have brown Soviet units and gray German units. Though there are rules that deal with squad integrity, players are urged to keep their squads together and not mix them too much with other squads. There are subtle rules, penalties for not keeping your units together that are part of the same squad. The squad was the functional unit of tactical combat in this period, World War II. Other minor differences involve distinguishing the platoon and assistant platoon leaders, commanding officers, and executive officers, and noticing little identifying marks when special rules are in effect, such as the underlining of the AFV's range to indicate that this range only applies to anti-personnel firepower. I haven't really gotten to that yet, so I don't know if that's picked up in Iron Cross again or not. Sequence of play. This is a standard phased play sequence. That's interesting that this is considered standard phased play in 1981 for combat. So interesting, 1981 considered a standard phased play sequence that will be familiar to players of tactical games. The attacker fires, moves, the defender gets to move, the defender gets to fire, the moving attackers get to fire, and then assaults occur. A minor change from the standard is the reaction movement phase. The defender doesn't have to sit still and be overrun by charging attackers. Of course, that's a very good thing. I cannot say I have a single qualm so far about the sequence of play. And I was skimming over the main battle area rules recently again, and reminded of how I really like multi-phased. Well, actually, I like the extremes. I like the open-ended kind of action phase, something like Death Ride Kursk, or I like long, detailed sequences of play that. And when I say long and detailed, it's in order to break everything down into nice, discrete bits. Okay, that's me. Preference, I think. But here I've never had an issue with Iron Cross's sequence of play. Performance. This is a concept that takes the gamer one step away from the outright certainty common in most war games, and I would agree with that quite a bit actually. To do practically anything in the game, sorry, there's a typo there. To do practically anything in the game, a unit must pass a performance check. One important factor to keep in mind is that if a unit undergoes a performance check to do something, it is exactly the same as if it did it, except that he doesn't get to actually do it. You, the gamer, may want the unit to do it, but that unit may not be on the same wavelength. In effect, each player represents a company commander drawing up plans for a situation and explaining it to the troops, but things don't always go smoothly. Performance is one of the most important aspects to consider when undertaking an operation. You may send some units to assault a building, but when they get there, it all depends on how well they are led and if they are led. Leaders are very important in this aspect. In many ways, units with a performance rating of 9 or higher can get a lot accomplished by acting as a fire team leader. That's good for realism. Then the units acting as separate entities could accomplish. Leaders lend a cohesive nature to a potentially reckless situation. Morale. This is a fairly standard section, not mentioned in the regular rules. And the morale phase is the extra functions that may be performed in this phase, such as spotting hidden units and buttoning up tanks. This is summarized on the turn sequence summary on the player's chart. Yeah. But actually, I mean, maybe it was very typical in this day. 1981 for game design at the tactical level, small unit tactical level. But I like the fact that you're basically, if units that are pinned are automatically recovered, so that's kind of an automatic delay. And then units that are suppressed roll to become unsuppressed. If they successfully roll to unsuppressed, then they are in good order. If they fail to successfully unsuppress, then they go to pinned, which just means that they will become unpinned on the next turn. I like that, simplicity. It's kind of clean, certainly compared to other aspects of this design. Movement. Movement is fairly standard hex-to-hex movement as movement points are expended. Keep in mind that infantry units may expend 6 movement points in the movement phase and 3 movement points in the reaction movement phase. I believe that's the same in Iron Cross. Anyways, there's a nice summary table. Also be wary of support weapons and their crews. Carrying support weapons does generally slow down the crew. Units need only occupy a hex with a support weapon to be a crew. See, this is different. In Iron Cross, the crews are integrated into the weapons counter, and crew members are kept on the side tracking sheet. Back earlier in combat, the unit represented the weapon, and you had to use your soldiers to crew it. So this is different. This changed. There is no predesignation of crew members. That of course is different with Iron Cross. The rule restricting units from moving right on past enemy units is simply for play balance in the basic game scenarios, though zone of control-ish. It keeps units from running all over a defensive position before it gets a chance to fire. Actually, in my play, I'm looking forward to getting the point where we have really close range fire and then actually getting to assault. Assault looks pretty clean. Alright, it is overruled by reaction fire in the advanced rules. Okay, this is absolutely the game to jump right in and use all the rules. Yeah, I won't talk about that now. Terrain effects on movement, not much new here. Generally, buildings, hedgerows, streams, and gullies, and travel uphill slows the unit down. Keep in mind that streams and gullies are generally the same. There are some scenarios where streams may not be crossed. This will never be the case with gullies. Okay, so that's in combat. I'm still hoping that I can take combat and translate it over to Iron Cross. It should not be much at all, but I will make everything in combat into Iron Cross. So, for example, I just talked about crew-served weapons. I will make the crew-served weapons act like they do in Iron Cross, not like they do in combat. And I'm thinking of doing that for everything. I'm thinking of just setting aside, just put everything away from combat and take the Iron Cross rules and use the maps and counters and scenarios from combat. That's what I'm hoping to do in the future. Stacking 6 infantry units, that's the same as in Iron Cross, are allowed in a hex. Preferably these units will be of the same squad. Some scenarios represent a conglomerate of forces that are not tied to command restrictions. They represent remnants of a fighting force and are capable of operating efficiently together. I initially wanted the rule to be totally strict and not allow inter-squad stacking, but the reality of such a thing would border on lunacy. There is no reason why 2 guys from different squads can't occupy the same 10 meters. They may not operate as efficiently as 2 guys trained to fight together, but they can exist together in the same spot. Basic line of sight. I'm not even going to talk about basic line of sight. I'm going to go to... I'm going to skip over that.